This is going to be a versus between Stormtroopers and Rebel soldiers. We will compare their training, body equipment, and weapons, then pit them against each other in a scenario. For this specific versus, we will only be using human Rebel soldiers, as they were most common among the Rebel ranks, and they won't possess a natural advantage or disadvantage seen in some other species. A few years after the formation of the Galactic Empire, the Imperial military started to move away from using the clones and started to recruit regular humans from across the galaxy. In order to qualify to become a Stormtrooper, a human would have to be at the top of his or her class. After being accepted, they went through rigorous training that shaped them into being elite soldiers of the Empire, who were fiercely loyal to the Emperor. However, their training wasn't always ideal, as there were many cases of training being rushed in order to fill the Stormtrooper ranks as a means of keeping up with the Empire's rapid expansion across the galaxy. Also, much of the training involved Stormtroopers to disregard fallen comrades in battle and to push on no matter the cost. This resulted in many Stormtroopers having low morale. Despite this, most of them were formidable soldiers that were honored in serving their empire. And before we go on to the Rebels, we want to dispel this notion that Stormtroopers are incompetent morons who can't aim. Doing so, we will refute the so-called evidence seen in the movies. The Stormtroopers on the first Death Star only missed because they were ordered to do so they could use the fleeing Millennium Falcon to track the Rebels to their secret base on Yavin 4. The Stormtroopers on Endor were only defeated because not only were they completely caught off guard by overwhelming force, but they were also fighting on territory they were unfamiliar with. A territory that was littered with deadly traps set up by the Ewoks. Ewoks are also very small and quick, making them very hard targets to hit. We should also keep in mind that Ewoks are extremely strong, and at times are referred to as mini Wookiees, so a rock thrown by them is like a rock thrown by a massive gorilla, and would knock out anyone hit in the head by sheer force alone, no matter what helmet they're wearing. Other than those two moments, Stormtroopers were portrayed as pretty dangerous in the movies, by slaughtering the Rebels on Tantive 4, and steamrolling them once again on the Battle of Hoth. Anyway, now with the Rebels. The Rebel Alliance didn't exactly have a training structure for regular Rebel soldiers, as they didn't have the resources or funding to create one. Due to this, most Rebel soldiers' training varied, with some coming into the rebellion with a full-blown military background and required no additional training, while others joined without any prior training and were only given a few weeks of blaster practice before being forced into combat. Some even defected from the Imperial military, and the only training they ever received was from the Empire. All in all, most rebels learned how to fight from experience rather than formal training. Most of them were also very dedicated to the rebel cause, and would even sacrifice themselves without a second thought. These two things alone made rebel soldiers a force to be reckoned with. Rebel soldiers tended to be a few years younger than their Stormtrooper counterparts, due to the Alliance not setting an age restriction for recruitment, with some soldiers being as young as 14 years old. This resulted in some soldiers of the Alliance Army having very little experience due to how young they were. Stormtrooper armor and the body glove underneath were designed to protect the user from both the environment and from blaster fire. For the environment, the armor gave protection from extreme heat and cold, as well as provided limited protection in the vacuum of space. For blasters, the armor was designed to disperse the blaster bolt throughout the suit, rather than trying to completely stop it. Although this greatly increased the survivability of the trooper, it did usually result in the trooper being temporarily paralyzed or knocked out, which is why you see some of them slightly moving after being shot down. The armor was capable of stopping light blaster bolts, allowing the soldier to keep on fighting, but anything above that resulted in the soldier being disabled. The helmet provided Stormtroopers the ability to see through smoke and darkness, as well as have a basic heads-up display which provided them environmental information and a simple targeting system. It also let them breathe through smoke. This armor did have some drawbacks though. By reducing the soldier's maneuverability due to its weight, it could also be temporarily disabled through an EMP bomb, with the trooper being knocked out as well. Also, the armor was not camouflaged, having the Stormtrooper sticking out in most environments. Rebel soldiers were not equipped with a standard uniform, due to the Rebel Alliance's limited resources. Instead, they wore whatever was available and what best suited the environment they were fighting in. This usually resulted in them being camouflaged to the environment, and because they tended not to wear armor, they were also very maneuverable. Rebel soldiers being hit directly by a blaster bolt usually resulted in their death, or at the very least, a serious injury that prevented them from fighting on. They wore backpacks which contained survival gear and additional blaster ammo. They also wore helmets that protected their heads from blunt objects, like light debris, but they weren't reinforced enough to protect from most blasters. The E11 blaster rifle was the standard issue blaster for most Stormtroopers. The E11 was a very versatile blaster, being able to alternate from semi-automatic to fully automatic, extend to a full rifle, and to switch between stun and lethal modes. The scope on the weapon allowed for the user to see through dark, smoky conditions, and could also be set to interface with the Stormtrooper's helmet. The blaster produced a powerful blaster bolt, which was capable of penetrating most types of body armor. Due to its long barrel, the blaster produced a very tightly focused beam. Because of this, the E11 was best suited for close to mid-range firefights, and in narrow confinements like starship corridors. The A280 blaster rifle was the most common blaster seen to be used by Rebel soldiers. It was a very powerful blaster that was considered to be one of the best armor-piercing blasters produced during the Galactic Civil War. It was capable of completely penetrating Stormtrooper armor with ease, which is probably why it so commonly was used by the Rebels. The A280 blaster was best used in mid to long ranges, and in more open environments like Hoth. One thing to note was that the A280 was much heavier than the E11. When it came to training, Stormtroopers definitely received the better end of the deal, by getting to use all the available resources that the Empire had to offer, such as getting first-hand experience on using military equipment, going through battle simulations, and getting taught by expert instructors. Sure, some Stormtroopers' training was rushed and was very harsh, but that wasn't the case for most of them. Rebel soldiers really only received very brief training, if any at all, and they mostly learned how to fight from experience. That is, if they were lucky enough to survive their first battle. Rebels who did possess superior abilities than their peers were given a chance to go through a special training program to have them become members of the Alliance Special Forces. But that was a completely different branch of the Alliance military, and really only took away the best from the Rebel Army branch. So for the training aspect, we will give Stormtroopers the point. For body equipment, Stormtroopers possessed far more useful body armor and equipment than the Rebels did. Not only did the armor protect them, but it also provided them a targeting system and sensors that allowed them to see through darkness and smoke. The only benefit a fully equipped Rebel soldier had was that they were slightly more mobile than Stormtroopers, but not by that much due to the heavy backpacks they wore and the heavy blasters they carried. For body equipment, the Stormtroopers get the point once again. For blasters, both the E11 and the A280 rifles were powerful blasters that excelled at different things. The E11 was more versatile, with its various firing modes, but was most effective at close range, with it starting to be less accurate at mid-range and eventually becoming very difficult to hit targets at long range. The A280 was sort of the opposite, as it didn't have many different firing modes, but was best suited for mid to long range fights. Since they were both very well made blasters, it is very difficult to decide which blaster is better, as it all would depend on the environment they are being used in. Because of this, it's going to be a tie between these two weapons. For this versus, both sides will have an equal amount of people to make things fair. Firstly, because the Rebel soldiers in this fight will be using the A280 rifles, a single direct hit from them will put the Stormtrooper down, as the A280s are easily able to penetrate Stormtrooper armor. And the same goes for the Rebels, as they don't wear any armor, so they would be brought down by a single direct shot. Now it all depends on the environment this fight would take place in. If the fight took place inside a ship or a space station with many corridors, then the Stormtroopers would easily win, as not only did their blasters excel in close quarters, but their helmets would have allowed them to see through smoke, which would have been in the area as a result from heavy fighting between the two forces in a tight confined area. This scenario would look very much like the fight on the Tantive 4, just with the Rebels being able to put down a few more Stormtroopers due to their blasters able to one-hit them, unlike the blaster pistols used by the Rebels in the movie. In urban-like environments, from dense cities like Coruscant to smaller towns like Mos Eisley, the Stormtroopers would have the advantage once more, with the environment being more confined with firefights happening within buildings and streets, allowing mostly for close-quarter combat. But the casualties for the Stormtroopers would be much higher from the previous setting, as urban environments can result in some mid to long range firefights. It's not until we start moving out more into the wilderness environments that the Rebels start to have more of an advantage. When it comes to wide open areas like mountainscapes and deserts, the Rebels would have the advantage of not only having a blaster that excels in long range fights, but also the advantage of being able to camouflage with the environment. The Stormtroopers on the other hand would stick out like sore thumbs in white only armor. In wide open environments, the Rebels would probably win 6 or 7 out of 10 times. Now, if these fights took place in complete darkness in any of the settings mentioned, then the Stormtroopers would win basically every single time, as their helmets allowed for them to see through the dark. The Rebels, on the other hand, would be completely blind or would expose themselves in their positions by using flashlights. In conclusion, the Stormtroopers, due to their weaponry and helmets, would have a greater chance of winning in settings that force close-quarter combat, as well as any time they fought in darkness. Rebels would have a greater chance of winning in environments that were wide open and were well suited for camouflage. Remember, this is our opinion based on the information provided. Let us know if you agree with us or not, and tell us why. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. And as always, may the Force be with you.